Good evening, everybody. This is Al Blumkin on the Comfortably Zone Radio Network. I'm here tonight with my co-host on Pittsburgh Sports, David Finoli. Our guest is David's co-author of the Pittsburgh Pirates Encyclopedia, Bill Rainier. Welcome, gentlemen.
How you doing, Al?
Okay.
Good to be back.
Okay, good to have you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get started. David, you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Well,
okay.
The World Series coming up, and certainly in the less than stellar season we've had this year, we're gonna spend each of the next 5 weeks talking about the Pirate World Championship seasons. Tonight we're gonna talk about the 1909 team. Bill and I did a book on the 1909 team when Cobb met Wagner. To me, it was the first World Series into a seventh and deciding game. And to me, it was the first sporting event that was true theater because you had the bad in Cobb, a man who seemingly was always in trouble with the law, and you had him against the consummate sportsman, Hannes Wagner, and ended up being a classic series. With the two stars there, ended up being a 27-year-old rookie pitcher by the name of Babe Adams. It was the most valuable player. But the team had a great year coming in. They were 110-42. You want to talk about consistency? First half of the season, 55-21. Second half, 55-21. They won, not counting the few games in April or October. They won 20 games or more in each month, except for June when they went 19-3, and even had a 16-game winning streak in September. Billy, what you kind of never thought maybe the team wasn't as majestic as I thought it was. What were your thoughts on the 1909 team?
Well, it's certainly an excellent team. There's no doubt about that. The one issue I've often had with like early baseball, say the first decade or so of the major leagues, is that there tended to be two or three teams really at the top, very dominating teams, and there tended to be two or three teams at the bottom that were just god-awful clubs. And 1909 was no exception in that Boston lost 108 games, St. Louis and Brooklyn each lost 98 games. So you had three good teams, the Pirates, the Cubs, and the Giants, and you had two mediocre teams in Cincinnati and Philly that combined records were right around 500. And then you had the three teams that were really, really bad. In fact, as I was looking at this, I looked at 1960 to kind of compare this. And the last place team in 1960 actually won more games than the sixth-place team in 1909.
Wow.
So kind of again, the top-heavy, dominating few teams.
So you're saying in the first few decades of the first couple decades of the 20th century, some of the magnificent win totals were probably a little more skewed.
Yeah, I think they were, because I think there were some more teams that were just really, really bad teams that the good teams, would go up against.
Absolutely.
Well, Boston was operated essentially as a farm team for the Giants.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Sort of like the way the Yankees operated the Kansas City A's in the 1950s, late 1950s.
Absolutely, that's a great comparison.
And the Cardinals were up until Branch Rickey went there from the Browns. The Cardinals were the bottom feeders of the National League during the entire dead ball era.
You're correct. Yeah, they I don't know if they ever had a really good season. Certainly
no,
not
they didn't.
Anything, but as far as even finishing well above 500, I don't recall that they had it.
No. In fact, in 1906, I found this out years ago. They only had one player that played in more than 100 games,
wow.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
It is. That certainly is. But the first decade, conversely for the Pirates, was certainly by far their most successful decade in the team history. Certainly the first dynasty of the 20th century, I always call them, in professional sports, winning in 1901, 02, and 03. But by this point in time, they were getting a little long in the tooth, so to speak. You had Wagner and Clark were 35 and 36 respectively. Tommy Leach, I believe, had also was over 30, and the great pitchers of the early part of the decade who were left at Lever and Felipe were getting a little long in the tooth. So it ended up being a team that was almost their last gasp. The last show of what was just a dominant franchise. Some of the other players, some comments towards a Bill Abstein or a Doc Miller?
Well, Bill Abstein was a guy the Pirates had hoped would fill the void that they'd had at first base since they had let Kitty Bransfield go in the early part of the decade. However, he had a mediocre season, and I thought you'd ask me about him, so I was kind of looking at him, comparing him to the other first basemen in the league, and he knocked in 70 runs, but none of his other stats really are that impressive offensively. He only walked 27 times in 512 at-bats. Even the guys who hit a lot worse than he did for batting average, and Abstein was a 260 hitter, which was the team average, which again was good for that time. Nothing outstanding, but it was a good average. But even the players like Fred Tenney, who only hit 235, he walked a lot more. There were guys who hit with more power. So if I'm looking at Abstein, I'm kind of looking at him and comparing him to the rest of the league and thinking, well, he's really he's been talked about a lot because he had a horrible World Series, but he really does not look like that impressive of a player for the whole season.
No, he really doesn't, and you're right. His offensive stats really, nothing in there really kicks out at you, and certainly his defensive prowess would come into play in the 1909 series.
Yes, definitely. When we were researching the book, I don't remember them bad articles necessarily about him defensively, but I don't remember like glowing reviews either. So, it's kind of hard going back. You don't have like a lot of first-hand accounts to rely on.
Yeah.
You're talking about a guy who played one season, basically. And again, was not like, a star player that people would be writing a lot about. Yeah.
No, certainly not. And, even though he was 35, the king of the offense was still Hannes Wagner. He came in 100 RBIs, 339 average, a 909 OPS, which in that era, with the lack of usual prodigious slugging percentages.
That was phenomenal.
Yeah.
He was easily the best hitter in the league. Just looking at him, comparing him to other players. Even in 1909, at his age, he was by far the best all-around hitter in the National League.
Yeah, nobody in the dead ball era came close to him as an offensive player.
No, and I just judge not from historians, but from everyday fans now. He kind of gets lost in the mix of just how magnificent he was in the era. Usually, if there's a list of top players of all time, Hannes Wagner is always in the top 10. Talks of Derek Jeter a few years ago being mentioned in his in the same breath were, in my eyes, kind of comical.
Well, it's as I put down on one Facebook post where a picture was put up of Wagner. I put up that it's been 100 years since he played his last game, and he's still considered the best shortstop ever.
Yeah.
It's a great point.
How many people in any field
Yeah, just like his counterpart.
Can be considered that.
His counterpart in the Negro Leagues, John Henry Lloyd, who played basically during the same time, is still considered the best shortstop in the history of the Negro Leagues.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. The bench was certainly nothing to write home about, so to speak. Ed Abbaticchio, who actually was probably a better football player than he was a baseball player, was on those great Latrobe teams, some of the first professional football teams of all time. In fact, he is on the first team who was paid for an entire season in 1897. But he was looking like an average player at that point. Ham high at 299. Not a lot of Bobby Byrne was probably the best player on the bench, and still not phenomenal on top of that.
Well, actually, Byrne was traded for and became the everyday third baseman. So his contributions is as an everyday player.
Right, but still not. It wasn't impressive, I guess was my point going through this.
But no, you're right. But one of the reasons I think the bench wasn't impressive, first of all, there's the era that the team was playing in. Most teams didn't have, very significant bench players. They may have one or two guys that were decent hitters. But the other thing that happened to the Pirates that year, if you look, they played 152 games. Out of that, Miller, Wilson, Leach, Fred Clark, and George Gibson all appeared in 150 games. So that's, four of your everyday players that basically you don't really need a true backup for. So,
right.
So the Pirates were blessed. They had pretty good health that year, and I'm sure there's a lot of stories about the guys rubbing dirt in their spike wounds and such, and getting out there and playing no matter what. But the idea was that you really didn't use too many backup players in those days.
You didn't,
right?
But
bench wasn't much of a factor, but again, I don't. The guys who were truly bench players for them, Al Stork, who they traded. One of the players they traded to get Byrne, had the most at-bats of any true bench player at 116.
Right, but I mean, my point with it was once these guys got in the next couple of years were not as useful major league players or didn't play anymore, the older ones. Uh-huh. This was what came into play a lot, and this is why the Pirates kind of did a nosedive, certainly not far after this championship, after winning 110 games. There wasn't a lot of offensive talent that they had to fill in for these guys over the next few years, and I certainly think that was one of the reasons. As I said, this was the end of the dynasty, and it died fairly quick.
Right. I think they had one more last gasp kind of year, a decent year, maybe in 1912 or something.
Right.
Was it, or was it 1911? 1912. Yeah, they finished.
It was
second, 12. But you're right. Most of these guys were gone by then, and the people who replaced them, just weren't really high caliber major leaguers then.
The history is when there's not a continual replacement. When it's happened through a lot of teams all throughout baseball history, that if you have no replacements, eventually the team is going to crash.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's
now on the mound.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's one of the things the Pirates emphasize in their strategies today is, they don't want to go through that period like they had the 20 bad years of losing. And so that's why, when there's talk about trading Cole or McCutchen or guys like that, that's part of what they bring up is that, they don't want to lose, have nobody to replace these guys with. If they walk as free agents, as say Bonds and Drabic did in '92, and you don't get anything for them, you're really probably going to be hurting pretty badly.
Right. Good philosophy, but getting on them a bit. Hopefully they can actually bring it to fruition by getting good replacements.
True.
But But the pitching staff that year was pretty spectacular. You guys want to talk a little about Vic Willis and Howie Kamnitz?
Yeah, I know Vic Willis is a Hall of Famer, and he was pitching. He came up, I think, with Boston and the Braves, really from 1909 to 1912, absolutely horrendous. They had a pitcher during that spell named Cliff Curtis, who had lost 23 games in a row, and was brought out of brought up when the Mets had this pitcher, Anthony Young, who wound up losing 27 in a row. And all of a sudden, when Young was approaching the record, Curtis all of a sudden became known to people.
Oh,
man.
I had forgotten about Cliff Curtis. I remembered Anthony Young, but I didn't remember Cliff Curtis.
Yeah, Anthony Young lost 27 straight. He passed away from a brain tumor this past year.
Unfortunately, just recently.
Yeah. But Kamnitz, I think, won 25 games that year for them.
He did.
Yes.
He did.
And I had another pitcher, LaField.
Yeah.
Because the story was the three big winners who were Kamnitz, LaField, and Willis didn't star in the World Series. And Babe Adams, who was a rookie, who went, I think, 12-3 during the regular season, would go on to win three World Series games, and was the first pitcher to do that within the confines of a 7-game series.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly he was a shocking starter in the first game. If I'm not mistaken, the legend has it that the president of the National League talked Fred Clark into starting him because he reminded him of, I believe, Dolly Gray was a pitcher who he said reminded him of some Dolly Gray who dominated the Tigers, but there might have been something more to it than that legend.
Yeah, you wonder about that because Dolly Gray was a left-hander first of all, so
right.
I don't know. And Dolly Gray didn't have any kind of impressive career. I don't know what I guess was John Hadler would have seen to say, oh, this guy reminds me a lot of Dolly Gray. But, that is the legend, and it makes for a good story for sure.
It does make for a good story, but if you look at Adams' September stats, I mean, he looked like he was becoming one of the hottest, if not the hottest pitcher on the team, and I would wonder if that probably had more to do with it than certainly the legendary story that had come out that's been told over the years.
Yeah, true. And you wonder sometimes, because, teams weren't going to necessarily broadcast that somebody's hurting or, there was, after the series, Vic Willis was traded in the story there was a story that was circulated that he was drinking a lot and that it was felt that he was becoming a bad influence on younger players. I don't know if that's true or not, but that story, got some print and, was his drinking starting to affect his pitching? Was it affecting, other aspects of his life? We don't know that, as far as why Willis didn't start till, what was it, it was somewhere in the middle of the series, I believe, that he started.
Yeah, it was, I had heard certainly that through the research and, but I mean, Kamnitz, who, if I'm not mistaken, he had an arm injury late in the season?
I don't recall, to be honest. He may have.
Okay, I think he had some injuries late in the season, if I'm not mistaken. And Liefeld definitely had some injuries late in the season, which they both pitched poorly in the series. And Adams, of course, comes out in the first game, gives up a run in the first inning. Willis looks like it was Game 6 that he ended up pitching his first game.
Yeah, well, that was the first series also where they alternated wins and losses.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's
the only one I can remember in my lifetime like that was 1962 between the Yankees and the Giants, where they alternated wins throughout the whole series through a 7-game series.
Oh yeah, that is a wild point, because that was you really don't see that in any sport.
No.
Yeah, so you don't get a sense of this team has momentum then.
Yeah.
You know, like someone hasn't won 2 in a row or 3 out of 4.
Right. But I mean it. It certainly seemed like after and Adams ended up being a great pitcher. If I'm not mistaken, he was our highest rated pitcher in the encyclopedia.
Yes, Adams definitely was our highest rated pitcher.
Over his career?
Terrific career. Yeah, over his career. Yeah, we rated him above Wilbur Cooper, the all-time winningest Pirate pitcher.
Yeah, that's ironic because Wilbur Cooper hasn't thrown a pitch for them in 93 years.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. But I mean, he ended up coming out, as I said, he pitched a wonderful game in Game 1, and certainly set the tone for his series. But again, he was pretty much, if you look at it, pretty much the only starter that certainly had some success in the series.
Yeah. Well, Maddox pitched a complete game. He only gave up 1 earned run. But yet he did allow like 11 hits in the game.
Right.
So he was kind of the team's, basically 4th starter for most of the season.
Yeah.
But, he certainly, and again, you're relying on, not one of the big 3 here to pick up that other win.
Right. I mean, second game, Kamnick gets just hammered in 2 innings. Vic Willis, he does come in relief in that game. Pitches decent, 6 innings, 2 runs, 4 walks. But the Pirates, of course, when you're they score 2 in the first, but then you're down very quickly, 5-2, and certainly could get no offense against Billy Donovan, who hadn't, who pitched a couple good games in the series also. So they, and again, Game 3, Nick Maddox, pitches a complete game, but gives up 11 hits and 6 runs in the process. 1 was earned. I mean,
1 was earned, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they were late runs, yeah. And Detroit scored all their runs late in the game.
They did. He tired out, actually, towards the end of the game. He pitched well the first 6. That was the first inning of your buddy Bill Epstein having a memorable series. 2 errors, pushing him up to 3 in the series at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting in a way. He played so poorly. There was never any mention of, any kind of like shenanigans or anything that, came to light, a decade or so later, in World Series play and in baseball in general. You look at that and it's like, man, that guy was really, really bad in that series. Maybe the worst series I can think of, certainly, that any Pirate ever had.
Well, I mean, 2 games later, he does the same thing again. In Game 4, he has 2 more errors. He's up to 5 at this point.
Wow. At first base, that's difficult. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a gentleman for the Senators in 25 that
Peckinpah, Roger Peckinpah.
Peckinpah. Roger Peckinpah. That's it. But certainly has to be tough for Peckinpah was if I'm not mistaken, had certainly much better standing than Bill Epstein.
Yes. Yeah, and Peckinpah stayed in the game for many years afterwards.
Yeah. But, you think of his name and certainly that 25 series is about the first thing you think of. It was a series also to the point, I mean, even though Detroit made it a little close in Game 3, there was really no classic game until Game 6. There were a lot of very one-run games, or very, not one-run games, but very one-sided games.
Yeah.
One-sided, yeah.
But Game 6 was one of the classic games in the World Series in the first couple decades, where the Pirates certainly came out like a ball of fire in the first inning, only to have Vic Willis kind of lose his edge towards the middle of the game. They ended up losing that game 5-4. Thought they had a good rally going in the ninth, only to blow it. So you're going to Bennett Park for Game 7, the first Game 7 in World Series history that meant an all-in-deciding games. Of course, there were others when the World Series was best of 9 that certainly didn't come down to that final, winner-take-all.
The Pirates lost in 8 games in 1903. Because that was the best of 9. Yeah.
Absolutely. But you're going into this. Certainly, you had the rug pulled from under you when you looked early on, like you were going to have an easy game as they scored 3 runs in the first inning. If you're a fan at that point, I don't know that you're feeling real confident going into Game 7 in your opponent's park. And if I recall, Bennett Park was a little bit of a bandbox back then, close to the field, fans on top of you type of deal. You guys remember anything about Bennett Park?
No, I'm sorry. Not particularly. If it was, a tight park, as you say, I'm not sure.
It was a couple of years before, what eventually became Tiger Stadium.
Right.
Yeah.
You decide to throw your hot pitcher out. Again, here's a 27-year-old pitcher. If I'm not mistaken, he was with St. Louis a couple years before, but didn't pitch enough to qualify as a rookie, correct?
Yeah, I think he was the kind of a late-season call-up type pitcher, that year with St. Louis.
Yeah.
On just a couple of games.
Yeah, absolutely. What were your thoughts on Babe Adams for his career?
On who?
Babe Adams.
Well, I know he was still there in 1925, so he must have had something. Apparently, I've seen of his record. He was a pretty good pitcher. I mean, he's no Hall of Famer. Wasn't on that level, but he was very good, very good.
Yeah, he was a great control pitcher. Certainly, probably one of the best in Pirate history. I would certainly figure. Was it? Remember the year he went 22 innings, 21 innings without a walk? I think it was 21 against the Giants without a walk. I believe it was 1912 or 14, if I'm not mistaken. But he pitched 21 innings against the Giants and didn't give up a walk. And obviously, that is a record that nobody will ever have the opportunity to touch again.
Oh God, yeah. To go 7 innings today, it's a major accomplishment.
Well, he would have won the game.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to say he's actually one of the great control pitchers in history. I believe next to Deacon Felipe that he was had the lowest walks per innings pitched in Major League history.
Which is certainly a great stat. Certainly dictates his control, and until his arm got sore right around World War I. He ended up losing a couple of years because of that, if I'm not mistaken, but came back and had a decent second part of his career. He was a reliever by 25, but ended up kind of rebounding from that injury. And as I said, I consider him, and I certainly would have enough to back that up, that he is the best pitcher in Pirate history. But at this point in time, he's just a great story at this point in time. I could only imagine if they had the social media of the day, that Babe Adams would have made millions in endorsements and such after being just so spectacular.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, he was given the nickname Babe because one woman referred to him as, a real babe, meaning, a really good-looking guy. So, if he had the matinee looks and the World Series MVP, yeah, I think he probably would have cashed in pretty good.
Well, he comes out here and they say the great players in the great moments do their best, and Dave Adams shut out the Tigers that day in a game that certainly from the onset was nothing more than a rout. They end up winning the contest 8-0. He gives up 6 hits and gets his shutout. The great Honus Wagner, who in 1903 was called by the Sporting News as Yellow, which back then was a coward, and it was something he had stuck with him until 1909. Certainly got the proverbial monkey off his back with 2 RBIs that day. Crushed Ty Cobb in the series. He hit .333. I believe Cobb was in the low 200s. If I'm not mistaken.
231. Yeah, he was
231.
Yeah, I think he was something like 6 or 26.
Oh, he had a horrible. One thing we found out from the research, one of the reasons Cobb played so badly, he had been there was a warrant for his arrest in Ohio. He had severely beat a night watchman at a hotel in Cleveland. So if he entered the boundaries of Ohio, he was going to be arrested. So to avoid it, he would take a car from Pittsburgh through Canada, and then he'd cut down to Pennsylvania in Toronto, which took a ton longer to do than taking a train from Detroit to Pittsburgh. And by the time the series was winding down, according to the newspapers clippings we read, he was exhausted. He was ill. He was exhausted. He basically drove, and he was in the back seat of his uncle's car, who would drive him on these long trips. And if you look at the stats, it's conceivable that's one of the things that did cause him to have such a lousy series.
That was also his last one at the age of 23,
yes, it was.
I think it was at that point.
Well, he was they were the Buffalo Bills of their day, losing 3 consecutive World Series.
Yeah, they lost all 3 of them. They and the 11 to 13 Giants are the only teams ever to lose 3 in a row like that.
Absolutely. Honus Wagner finally had his day. Tommy Leach, who was getting older himself, and could be one of the underrated players in Pirate history, a guy who had a great career here. If I'm not mistaken, he was part of the Louisville gang.
He, Clark, and Wagner were all part of that.
Yeah. Certainly the trade that set up the dynasty, which wasn't really a trade, but they got him. They got Deacon Felipe.
There was syndication back in the 1890s, and when I think Dreyfus bought part of Louisville, he merged them with I think he owned Louisville, and he was allowed to buy into the Pirates.
Yes.
And he brought all these guys over. I mean, there was others. Brooklyn and Boston had a thing in Brooklyn and Baltimore, had a thing in the 1890s where the Brooklyn owner bought out the Orioles, and except for McGraw and Wilbur Robertson, they all wound up going to Brooklyn, and the third one was the joint ownership of Cleveland and St. Louis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Cleveland was a powerhouse in a very good team in most of the 1890s, and the Robeson brothers owned both of them, and Cleveland wouldn't allow Sunday ball or beer. In fact, a couple of times they arrested them for trying to play a game on Sunday, and he decided to heck with this, and he moved all the good players out from Cleveland to St. Louis. And Cleveland, of course, in 1899 won 20 games, and then it was dropped from the National League.
Oh man. But was that a good chunk of the 1900 Brooklyn championship?
Oh yeah, 1899 and 1900 Brooklyn championships. Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. So they certainly benefited from the
Yeah, and the three, Louisville, Baltimore, and Cleveland were three of the four that were dropped from the National League at the end of 1899. Fourth one was Washington.
Okay. But, so, where would you guys, thinking about this, the four championship teams, this, of course, being the only World Series winner, but, of course, the World Series didn't start till 1903. Where would you put this team among those four that won championships in the decade? I know 1902 was the best percentage.
Yeah, but that basically, from what I understand, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read in a number of places that when the American League was formed and most of the National League stars started jumping, that Van Johnson had the idea to leave the Pirates alone, so the race would be completely one-sided, and there was would be no big attendance drop.
Yes,
but when they won in 1902 by I think it was 27 and a half games, I'm sure by the end of that season, since there was nowhere to go after the regular season, that when these teams are so far behind, the people start coming. And then when they settled it before the 1903 season, and Pirates lost, I think it was Jack Chesbrough and Tannehill to the American League, but those two were basically the only Pirate players that went over.
You're correct, and because of that and the dilution of talent, I've always kind of looked a little skeptically at those teams from the earliest part of the century, the first few years of the century. In fact, I sometimes have a lot of boring evenings, when my kids are asleep and wife's working, and I was trying to think, well, if I took so many players out of, say, 1971, how many games would the Pirates of 1971 have won? If you're talking, like let's say you're losing Joe Torre off the Cardinals and you're losing Willie Mays from the Giants and you're trying to find comparable players, the dilution of talent to me would definitely mean that you have a team that would be just so dominant that that I question. Again, I'm not saying they're not a great team, but are they the best team in Pirate history? And I have a hard time with that.
Well, I absolutely see what you mean. I mean, and certainly, if Van Johnson had in fact done that, it would have been a brilliant business move on his part. They also say part of the reason not many Pirates left was there was a loyalty to Dreyfus. I guess for the day he treated his players about as good, if not better, than any other franchise had. So there was some loyalty there, but that
1909 team, they had to be very, very good to beat the Cubs out because that was the only time, during those 5 years that the Cubs won 104 games that season.
Right. Yes.
Right. Oh. And that's why I also contend that 1902 maybe was a little better than what you might be insinuating because there was the base of these players at this point in time in their prime who had phenomenal seasons. Yes, pulling out all those players did precipitate what in essence was a very one-sided. What was that record? 102 and 36, if I'm not mistaken.
Who, Cubs?
The Pirates in 1902.
Pirates in 1902.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Quick look.
I think they play 140 game schedules those years.
Yeah, 103 and 36.
Yeah.
103 and 36. But I do think with that core there, and they proved to be in their older days in 1909, even in 1908. I mean, they were a game away from winning the pennant that year too.
Yeah, if they would have beaten the Cubs the last day of the season, they would have. They would have wound up tied with the Giants.
Yeah. But I that's why I give 1902 maybe a little more credence because these guys were in their prime at that point, and it was still a great team. I'm not sure how many more games they would have lost, but that's that's the one reason I kind of voted that one the number one team, was just because, you know, you had great players in their prime. And I think if you put that team against 1909 over the course of 162 games, I think 1902 would prove to be the better team myself. But that's the reason I kind of give them a little more credit.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical. You may have a lot more guys you're competing against that are pretty much what we would consider like AAA players in 1902.
Right.
By 1909, there was probably more of a swing back, a little bit more of a balance.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that Cub dynasty from 1906 through 1910 was very, very tough. The fact that the Pirates were over to in 1909 were able to overcome a 104-win team, I think that says a lot for them.
Yeah. I would agree that, you know, I would probably rate 1909 ahead of 1902 because I think that they were facing more balanced competition as far as players who really belonged in the major leagues.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. That is certainly true. But regardless, I mean, they're both great teams, and
oh yeah,
certainly, you know, in my eyes, they were. When I was doing the book that's coming out next month on Pittsburgh's greatest champions, you and I had several conversations about that, and I mean, you know, you certainly brought up some valid points for 1909. You know, obviously, I've given away who I've chosen in the book. I don't know if that was the smartest thing, but you know, but
buy the book anyways.
But buy the book. There are 4.
Yes,
it gives people a chance to argue about stuff.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it. Actually, waiting for that to come out. Yeah.
That's right. I got the promotional poster today, so not too far away.
Cool. Get back to the 1909 World Series. One of the things that really stuck out to me as far as a stat line goes was Fred Clark's statistics in the series. It was almost like seeing a modern day player, you know, Moneyball type player. He had 19 at bats, only 4 hits, but he scored 7 runs and drove in 7 runs. It was kind of a really amazing stats. He had the only 2 home runs of the series. He walked 5 times, stole 3 bases. Kind of a very underrated series, but, you know, and some of his hits were very, very key hits. I think one of his home runs won a game, if I'm not mistaken, or was it?
You were correct.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I may be jumping the gun somewhat, but years ago, I interviewed Dick Grote in 1985 when they came in to play. The basketball team came in to play St. John's. I had set this up, a friend of mine had set this up for me at the time, and so I went through the play-by-play of the 1960 World Series, and you can't believe what kind of an impact Bill Verdon had in that series. But we'll get to that when we come to it. But he was involved in almost every single key moment that the Pirates had during that World Series. So it happens. Yeah. You get guys who are, you know, they were just in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, because Clark was an outstanding offensive player, but Verdon really wasn't. But when you look at that, you look at, like, I think he hits 240 in the series, something like that. But you're right, so many clutch hits, runs scored, and of course defensive plays.
Yeah, made some great defensive plays. But actually, that last year I had gotten around to getting the radio broadcast of the of that series. I got the 4 wins because, quite frankly, the 3 losses would just have been too painful to listen to, as bad as they got beat. But you're right. I mean, listening to the games as they were actually being played, Verdon was a huge part of that, especially with his defensive play, and he did have some clutch hits. You know, and
when I went through the play-by-play on that entire series, I was just amazed by it. You know, and I never realized. I knew he was involved in a few key ones, but I never until I went through the play-by-play, I never realized the extent of it.
No, it was amazing. As close as the games that they won were,
Yeah.
He doesn't make one or two of those defensive gems or one or two of those clutch hits. Without Burton, they don't win the series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it happens that, as I said, there are certain, that's why it's so hard to, predict that, especially in a 7-game series, who's going to be the most valuable player, because you get people that produce when they have to, and you also get people who can't do it when they have to.
Well, certainly.
I'm sorry, Dave.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think in a way, like Burton's series, and I don't know about your father, Dave, or Al. I know you were a Pittsburgh fan going way back, but I know, my father always really liked Bill Burton a lot. And my father-in-law always liked Bill Burton a lot. And I think that series kind of elevated him, from being, a terrific defensive ball player, decent hitter, into, that legendary status in Pittsburgh.
Which my dad certainly talked about him in those terms, too. I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I saw them and listened to them as much as I could. Even when I was back here, I would listen to the games off WWVA in Wheeling, because that was the only station we could pick up here, because KDKA was blocked by, 250,000-watt stations on either end here. So I used to listen to their games on WWVA.
Well,
of course, when school was in session, I was there all the time.
There you go, as we were in '79.
Yeah.
But certainly, talking clutch players. I mean, obviously, Dave Adams would be the MVP of this series.
Yeah. Didn't have any of that back then either.
Yeah. No. I mean, that's certainly.
Yeah.
As great as the moments that have come since, I would say, in my mind, this guy had the greatest World Series in Pittsburgh history.
You're probably right.
That's always been my opinion. Anyways, I would certainly thank you much, Bill, for joining us. And you're going to
thank
join
you
us
both
again, for the 1971 or 79 segment, hopefully.
Yes, I am, sure, hopefully.
And next week, Al, we got the 1925 talk coming up. We're going to have as our guest gentleman who had just done a wonderful job with biography on Fred Clark. He's written about the 1902 team.
Waldo?
Ronald.
Yeah, okay, because I've read this. I read the biography on Clark. I read his book on the 1925 World Series.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they're great books. He also did one on 02 that I just finished.
He did one else, I think, on the 38 season, right?
So,
anyways,
we have that.
Yeah,
absolutely. And certainly enjoyed talking with you today, Al.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you both. And, just said this is the Comfortably Zone Radio Network. And I hope you enjoy the show, and we will return next week. Thank you both for a very interesting and insightful podcast.
It was enjoyable, and we'll talk to you next week, Al.
Okay. Take care, boys. Take care, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.